Good afternoon, everyone. I am so glad you have chosen to spend some time with us together. Welcome to the third year of the UNC Systems FLC, and I am very excited to be kicking off our third year with two amazing speakers that I got to see earlier this summer. And they are going to be talking about student voices on AI. And so, Kimberly and Aleta, I'd like to have you introduce yourselves, and I'll turn it over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Aleta and I are really excited to share our research with you. I am the assistant professor at Kenan-Flagler Business School, and my core course that I teach is management and corporate communication. I'm super passionate about sharing my expertise, not only with fellow faculty members, but also with instructional designers as we start to create this beautiful landscape for students so we can have much more engaged and appreciative learning. So I appreciate your attendance today. Aleta?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Kimberly, for inviting me to be on this research with you. I am a second-year doctoral student in the School of Education at UNC Chapel Hill, and I'm really interested in a lot of interdisciplinary research that is at the intersection of teaching and learning and teacher education. And I think student voices have to be at the center of that. And so I was really thrilled to work on this with Kimberly.
Awesome. So our presentation today is going to cover the research that we did earlier in the summer as it relates to student voices on AI. We're going to give you a brief overview of the literature review that we've focused on, where we fill the gap, and then get into how we designed our study, the results from our study, and then how we kind of discuss our study through the theoretical framework. So if you're ready, I'm ready. Okay, so it's really important that we understand that as we look at the AI landscape, it has created a kind of whirlwind. I think that would be a great image for us to kind of stick with. And this whirlwind is creating good things. This is creating challenges, but it's creating really great opportunities. And as we hear all the research on AI, what Aleta and I was really interested in is the fact that the emergence of AI is really causing a rift between two of its main stakeholders, two of education's main stakeholders, which would be professors and students. And sometimes we see that the research has these two stakeholders at opposite sides of the table, both looking for solutions on how to master the complexity that AI pulls through. And so given this problem, we wanted to really explore how students, especially the student voices, because as faculty members, we tend to kind of focus on what's going on within our circle, Aleta and I really wanted to look at how students were perceiving AI, specifically within a business context. That's the environment with which I study. And I thought the business context was such a unique context because as I teach business students each and every day, we're expected for them to go out into this environment where they're supposed to think critically and be ethical and take into all these considerations, yet balance the nudge of AI in and of itself. And so our research is kind of hoping to give instructors an opportunity to understand how students are actually using the AI, not just this scared thought process as to what AI is doing for our students, but hearing their voices themselves. Given these parameters, we are exploring two research questions in this study. The first one focuses on how do business undergraduate students use generative AI? So the actual use that they are engaging in, what they're doing. And then how do business undergraduates perceive generative AI? So what are their thoughts, feelings, attitudes grounded in that area? I'm going to let Aleta take over just here so she can talk a little bit about the lit review. Aleta?
Thank you, Kimberly. So in order to get started on this study, we acquainted ourselves with the extant literature on Gen AI in higher ed. We used Education Full Text as our database to do this literature review. And we looked at 18 peer review articles that were published between 2023 and 2025. Some of the things that we found were that although there were a few mixed method studies included in the literature, there were no solely qualitative studies. And only two of the studies originated from United States-based universities. So most of the studies were quantitative or empirical designs, and there was also one meta-analysis that we looked at that synthesized 69 different quantitative studies. And our study focuses really on this gap that has been left by the literature, looking at the qualitative data to try to understand students' justifications behind their use and perceptions of AI. Now, importantly, we did not look at K through 12 literature. We only looked at higher ed lit. So it's also important to note that students have various uses of AI based on literature. So it reports that students are using Gen AI to support their academic work, and this includes planning, revising, and writing. They're also using it to generate ideas and to compare Gen AI text to their own writing. They use it to create personalized examples that are easier for them to understand, perhaps, than what professors are offering. And they're also using it because it's immediately available whenever they need help, maybe at 2 a.m. when they haven't planned ahead and they just need somebody to answer a question. And, there was even one study that showed that it was used to help students probe critical thinking in a debate course on international relations. So there are various uses by students across the literature as reported by the literature. When it comes to perceptions, there is also a bifurcation. Not everybody is gung-ho about Gen AI. So some students are perceiving it as useful and beneficial, and then other students are perceiving it as negative. So those who are really enthusiastic and feel really positively about Gen AI, they're using it because they feel confident using it. Their perceptions about the usefulness of it also contribute to this like positive feeling and affect toward Gen AI. They're really enthusiastic about it. And then those who feel kind of more negatively about Gen AI feel that way, as reported by the literature, because they think it has unreliable information, they doubt its accuracy, and also it's not necessarily always citing people the way it should. AI hallucinates sometime. You may have heard of chat hallucinating. And then they also fear a dependence on AI and the way it might threaten our intellectual independence. So I mentioned this briefly earlier, but there is a gap in the literature and space for future study. And that really comes down to the ways that Gen AI might be able to help enhance student engagement. And so we're really investigating what influences students' perceptions and patterns of Gen AI use. And we're trying to address this gap by developing pedagogical recommendations that are really responsive to student use and perception from what we found in our study. And we also recognized that business was actually the least represented discipline within the literature. So that was another gap that we hope to address by having participants who were business undergraduates.
Lovely. Thank you, Aleta. Now, as we look at our study, we definitely want to frame it in and ground it in theory. So we utilize the technology acceptance model. As you see on the screen, this is the original model, and it looks at students' ability, or well, it predicts users' acceptance of technology, and across two facets: perceived usefulness, which is just the degree to which the particular technology enhances your ability to perform and be productive, but also how easy it is to use, how free of effort. And those two factors contributed to your attitude towards using the tech, your behavioral intention towards using the tech, and your actual use with the technology. Now, specifically related to our study, we thought that a technology acceptance model 3, which added 2 more components, trust and system quality, as well as interactions and moderators, were an additional component that we wanted to look at when it comes to just the use of AI. And so as the literature showed that students were using it and saw that it was easy, they were using it and saw that it was helpful, but there was other factors. With any new technology, there's cognitive, emotional, and social factors tied to the use of technology. So there was underlying layers as to why the technology will be helpful. And we wanted to actually frame our results using this particular model to show that the additional layers, the cognitive, the emotional, and the social layers, things that affect things like accuracy, experience, willingness, were factors that were key in student usage of the AI. Now, for our study, we engaged in a qualitative research study. We have 15 total participants, and we engaged in semi-structured interviews where we assessed themes based on respondents' sharing and experiences with the use of generative AI, both in courses and both in their personal life. So if we go back to our RQ1, we're about to share a little bit of the findings with you and the actual student quotes that we got, which are really good gems as we start to put together our themes for this study. So if you remember, our research question talked about how do business undergraduate students use generative AI? Well, like the literature was saying, we saw academic use in the fact of students mentioned brainstorming, fact-checking, fine-tuning, but we also saw a little bit of personal use. So assistance with personal relationships, navigating tough situations, and something as simple as just booking travel plans. So AI is a part of every fabric of what students are using based on the responses that we received. Now, we categorized, right, some of these responses because even though students said they were using it for academic use, this is the underlying layer that we found as we started to analyze the responses. It wasn't just that we were using it for brainstorming, but it was specific courses and assignment types, right? That's the pattern that we saw that would keep repeating depending on the student based on the student that we were talking with. So for example, Lucky mentioned that, if he was taking some electives, he wasn't really using it, but when classes start to get really difficult, right, or something that he couldn't figure out, this is where AI came into play. We also saw Mr. A says, if I'm in a general education class and I feel like I'm getting busy work or the assignment is not really up to my standard or it's boring or dull, this is where I'm going to use the AI. We also saw preferred AI use. So students were gravitating to one specific AI. For example, this particular student talked about utilizing Notebook LM, especially when he was focusing on a particular task, right? He says math is a little bit harder. It's harder to listen and take notes. So the usage of Notebook LM helped him to kind of upload some of the PDFs and get some debriefings. And so as students started to talk, we're thinking, okay, they're not just pulling out the AI at any stop. They're intentionally using it based on things like the additional models we saw in the TAM3. There was something related to their interactions, to their trust level that really pushed them to utilize the AI. We also saw time as a significant recurring pattern as students talked, right? And so Maggie talked about it being very convenient, quickly punch something in, quickly get something out. And this is, Aleta and I, kind of trumped this up to the fact that we're really in an instant gratification world. We also saw students having a lot of responsibilities. And so they needed this quick fix and this need to check off the box. And so we saw that their use of AI, especially in the academic context, was governed by how much time they had, right? Jimmy, which was one of our favorite participants, talked about in my brain, it's like how you get used to the outcome. You need to get the most efficient manner possible. And so Jimmy often explained that he was juggling 5 to 6 classes with homework and assignments and 50-page readings in each. How is he going to get through it all? AI was there to help him out there. We also had XYZ talked about just, again, when we're looking at time-saving components, if I don't know it, I'll ask chat, right? Or if I feel like there's something that I can do better with my time, I'll punch it into chat. Additionally, another pattern that we saw, I forgot Lucky here, and I don't want to leave him out because he made an interesting point before I move on. We had a lot of students talk about getting stuck and reaching out to friends and reaching out to people that they felt comfortable talking with. And if their friends didn't know, then AI was the resource. And we kind of probed some of these students, especially when they said reaching out to friends, like, why not reach out to your professor? Why is that not your first time-saving source? Again, time is the factor. A lot of times when they're reaching out to their friends, they're outside of the time window or the office hours window, or it's too late to send that email. And so AI becomes that time-saving, convenient approach. Another interesting factor that we saw come up, and even though it's interesting, we know students kind of put it on us sometimes as instructors, right? Instructor behavior had a lot to do with how they utilize the AI, and whether or not they utilized it in class. I had a student, Amy, come back and said, a professor doesn't know you the way like your high school teacher knows you. And this spoke a lot to her hesitancy at some point in using AI. I don't want my professor to see me using it and react negatively towards it and then think I am a bad person, right? Sometimes if a professor doesn't really talk about it, I don't know how they're going to react. And so a professor's approach to the AI, how it's being expressed, whether or not they have an AI policy, was a key factor in how students utilize the AI in and of itself. And last but not least, when it comes to use in this particular category that we saw, a lot of it was task oriented. So if they needed to create some kind of activity, if they needed to have generate some ideas, as we mentioned, brainstorming, but it was dependent on what it was doing, what called for that particular brainstorming moment. And that was very individualistic to, different students. Theodore talked about doing it in a much more personal context. Amy talked about doing it again when she's looking at analyzing questions or assessing relationship with friends. And so that gave us the thought process, Aleta and I, to just say, okay, well, they're using it academically, they're using it personally, this is within their fabric. We as instructors, as instructional designers, as institutions, cannot leave it out of the framework that we are utilizing within the environmental context. Okay. All right, Aleta is going to take over and give you the perceived viewpoint of students with RQ2. Aleta?
Thanks, Kimberly. And, as we mentioned earlier with our theoretical framework, the perception and use are connected. And so it was really important that we kind of probed and pried a little bit deeper into how are students perceiving this? How are they feeling about it? What are the thoughts, emotions, and affects that they have around generative AI? And so that is where RQ2 came from. How do business undergraduate students perceive generative AI chatbots? So what we did see was that there again was a split. There are some students who have really mixed feelings about it, but some of them are positive, right? Generative AI was perceived as something that was relevant. It was available, supportive, and was really something that felt like it's there to support them in their studies, in their work, in a way that perhaps they don't feel the same way about a professor, right? Because they don't have that same relationship with it. Something that really came up is that they perceived generative AI as a sidekick, a thought partner, a peer, a tutor. They were building like these kind of relationships with the generative AI. Now, there is also negative perceptions around Gen AI where they did perceive that, okay, I got to double check this because I know that sometimes it's not accurate or I'm becoming over reliant on it. And the negative emotions that were perceived around Gen AI included guilt, shame, fear, these kind of like insecurities, intellectual insecurities that kind of like bubbled up as they were sharing their use of Gen AI. And then this resulted in a sort of internal battle, a struggle, a tension that they felt between these positive and negative perceptions of Gen AI use. And this really manifested in a dilemma between grades and learning. So we'll see this in some of the examples later, but students really felt like I have to get this grade in order to get the job, right? In order to get the salary that I need to pay back my student loans or whatever it may be, even though I want to learn. And I want to learn because I'm interested in this, but right now learning isn't what is being prioritized, it's my grades because that's what allows me to move to the next step in my life. And so this internal battle will be evident in some of the examples I share. So the positive perception, students were really just sharing, okay, like, yeah, I give this an 8 out of 10, like you would say, in terms of how helpful it is and the effectiveness of it. Other students said it's just so much easier than going to office hours or asking your TA. So it's like, okay, I have the app on my phone, I have the website, boom, boom, boom. Some of the other positive perceptions included what June said, kind of framing Gen AI as a tutor, kind of like personifying it a little bit, right? And how it's like there for her when she gets really confused or if she gets confused she can ask it a question so that she can remain engaged in class instead of zoning out. So the negative perceptions, there is a shift here where students are also aware of kind of the disparities in the way it's being used by different people in class. So the student who's a student in Beyonce says that once she wrote a whole paper by herself, and then somebody else who used Gen AI got a better grade. And so Beyonce really didn't appreciate how, there's kind of like there's an unequal kind of application in terms of when it's clear it can be used or should be used and how the grading is happening around that. And she also shared that there's a stigma about getting in trouble around using it and said that it's not technically rightish depending on how you're using it. So there's this like kind of dilemma, and the tension starts to come out in her sharing of the perception of how she uses it and how she's seen her peers use it. Next, we see also this perception of it's something that's becoming more accepted, but it's kind of slow on the pickup, perhaps in terms of the way that professors are perceiving it. Jimmy Johnson says it's like a positively sloping negative, so it still hasn't risen above the x-axis. And there's a big stigma around the cheating and the plagiarizing, so he kind of attributed that stigma to the reason that it's being negatively perceived. Now, when it comes to the trade-offs and the reasons that students are using it and perceiving it in the ways that they are, Joel says it's instrumental for people in getting their work done. And as Kimberly shared earlier, students are overloaded. They feel overwhelmed, and for good reason. And so people really do feel the pressure to use it to get their work done. Next, another trade-off we noticed was that, Kimberly asked this really great question. She says, I want to go back to your honorable statement. So for the classes where professors say no AI, are you still using AI in those classes? And Joel says, definitely. And Joel goes on to say, after Kimberly asks, how are you feeling about that? He says, honestly, not that bad. So his perceptions about kind of violating the AI policy are not that bad because it's so helpful, you can't really ignore it. And time constraint is the biggest bottleneck for Joel. And that's what we're all battling with. We're being students. And so it just makes everything so much more efficient. So they understand kind of the moral implications of what they're doing, and they're still choosing AI because of the time constraints and the overwhelming amount of work. Another trade-off that was shared by Jimmy Johnson is that, he understands also this ethical tension that he's wrestling with. There are times that he has been less ethical than others. I won't lie. He shares about like a problem set for a math class and says the alternative to using ChatGPT is getting a 0 on the homework, and that's not an option. And toward the end of this comment, he says, are grades actually beneficial to learning? Which I really loved and appreciated that he brought that up, because that is a conversation that has been going on for a while. And I think that it's something that is really at the center of why students are choosing to use this, even if they know it might be quote unquote the wrong thing to do. Next, we have a little bit of a student who shares their emotional perceptions on the next slide of guilt, shame, and fear around using it. So Theodore says, I just feel guilty about using it sometimes because I'm afforded opportunities that other people aren't afforded. And I don't want to be one of those people who goes through college relying on AI. So they see the opportunity to go to college as something that should kind of like disallow their AI use because it's not taking advantage of this opportunity to be a critical thinker. And I thought that was a really interesting comment that Theodore brought up. Another student shared that one of the reasons that they feel guilt is because I don't think a lot of professors are open to ChatGPT in the first place. So that environment of like not even allowing it is what causes the guilt. So again, kind of this instructor framing of AI really contributes to the ways that students are feeling about and perceiving Gen AI. And I'm going to throw it back over to Kimberly now.
Thank you, Aleta. Okay, so with all of the data and the interpretation that the context that we set for you, what does this actually mean? When we tie in the findings with our theoretical framework, we see for a fact, that perceived use and ease of use is shaping how students adopt and integrate the AI. We see it in both the academic context and the environmental context and the personal context. What we also see, and I think this is the real gem from the research, is that contextual and interpersonal factors also impact use. So, how demanding is the course? What is the instructor's behavior towards it? And these things are influencing things like the depth of use, how far students are going to take in terms of using, the frequency, and how open they'll actually be when they're telling you about AI, right? And so there is this negotiation that is happening as students are pulling up the AI between what am I battling? Am I battling my academic goals to get an A in this class? Am I battling my moral compass? Am I battling the institutional culture? And so even though students are utilizing the AI, they are setting up some ethical and moral guardrails and rules even for themselves as they negotiate the use of AI. And so a lot of the external variables that the TA, the Technology Acceptance Model 3, actually looks like when it comes to trust and interpersonal factors, we saw those things as course types. So gen eds versus core courses. Assignment type, was it a writing response or a problem solving response? And also the instructor's attributes. So is the instructor more open to utilizing the AI? Were they more neutral? Was there a policy in place? How restrictive was that, right? And these things impacted students' experiences with AI and their willingness to use it in and of itself. And so as we listen to students, as we thought about the context, there are three things that we thought instructors, instructional designers, and the institutions need to be aware of. There is this emotional safety that AI creates, right? That allows them to disconnect from some of the guilt and the shame that we saw come up in the research, right? And this emotional safety connects to the dimension of ease of use. Nobody will judge me for asking a silly question. Nobody will say that I'm not as smart because I didn't do the reading today. My instructor won't be disappointed, or I won't be judged unfairly because my instructor doesn't know me enough. And so AI becomes this little bit of an emotional safety net, and we see that bleed over from academic use to personal use. We also see that there's a disconnect between perceived utility and institutional acceptance. And what I mean by that is AI is useful and it's helping students, do what they need to do to reach their academic goals. But the institution or even instructors in of itself creates this perception of it creating a negative on critical thinking, and students can't advance because they're not doing it, or using their own brain to get it done. And so that disconnect is sometimes creating this uncertainty as students start to embark on the use of AI, and also limiting the potential positives that could be created if there was a combination between instructors' willingness to utilize that within the classroom, or at least have a clear policy and approach towards it, and realizing that it is a helpful tool in certain contexts. Last but not least, there are some subjective norms within the classroom environment, and this can really influence students' use of it within the classroom environment. And this particular point brings me back to one of our students that we interviewed who did a study abroad in Singapore. And in Singapore, the student stated that use of AI was opened, it was frequent, it was one of the first things and top things that were expressed in class. Everybody had it, not just the free version, but the paid version, and it was a part of the classroom environment. And when she left her study abroad program and came back to UNC, she said she had to purge herself. She used those words, purge herself from AI, because she's coming back into a classroom environment where it's subjective. Some professors were using it, some weren't, and there was just this negativity as it relates to AI in and of itself. And so these things are, facets that we weren't seeing from the data and the numbers in the literature. We were seeing that, yes, they were using it. This is what they're using it for, but we weren't getting to the layers of the why, of the how it's making them feel. And this is I think one of the gold spots that we had in the research in and of itself. Aleta, take us to close.
So I want to share a few implications for practice, but before doing that, I do just want to acknowledge that teaching is a really hard job, right? There are constantly changes in technology, things going on in the world. Like every student is different and needs different things from us. And so as I share these, I just want to say that these are going to look different for every instructor in every classroom, and they're just kind of some ideas to think about, but take what you need and leave what you don't. And as we're kind of moving forward into this world where AI is kind of just like in the water that we're swimming in, what are some of the things that like might really work for you in your setting? So how are we going to align institutional expectations with student realities, right? Like what are students doing and how can we be responsive to students? The first thing is rethinking instructional design. When we're creating a syllabi or assigning different summative assessments, how are we being incredibly clear about what type of AI use is encouraged, right? Or discouraged? And then how are we also using the resources of our institutions? Many of our institutions now have web pages that provide resources for AI use. How are we making sure that we're familiarizing ourselves with that and also sharing that with our students? And then really emphasizing process over product, right? How are we making sure that we're emphasizing the writing process and not just the finished product? How are we making sure that we're making space for integrating critical reflection into the classroom? And how are we asking students to justify their AI use to maintain that academic rigor and help them really use their metacognitive skills to think about why am I using this? Maybe I shouldn't be for this, right? And really encouraging students to engage in that type of reflection. The next and incredibly important piece for practitioners is teaching AI literacy. What are the different AI tools that are out there? What might be most appropriate for a given course? How are we making sure that we're acknowledging that this is just a part of students' toolkits, right? And instead of framing it in terms of punishment, promoting ethical and transparent engagement. And also, how are we providing constant feedback opportunities for students in our courses? And then supporting critical use and explicit instruction of prompting. When I say critical use, I mean saying AI is not a neutral tool. AI is not a neutral tool. We know that AI aggravates pre-existing biases. We know that AI has been built by people, right? It's not neutral. And so how are we making sure that we're situating AI within our social context so that students are aware of the fact that this is something that is going to be bringing the biases of our world, of our country, into their work. And so I just really want to be clear that that's a really important thing to make sure that we're explicit with students about. The type of language that's used is not neutral, right? It's kind of Anglo-white type of talking. We need to be really clear about that with our students. Also, if we're asking them to use it, are we teaching them that? So make sure that we're not just saying like, use it, but providing examples, making sure that we're really clear about when we're prompting AI to help us with an assignment, this is how we might formulate a question. The next thing I just want to touch on is that this really comes down to classroom community. It's hard to have a class of 100 plus students and build a classroom community, but it is possible. And I think that we can really set the tone for our class to have open dialogues where we're, again, not shaming students for the tools that we're using, but encouraging them to wrestle with these tensions that they're feeling and kind of talk through how we might be able to incorporate AI in an ethical way, in a way that protects academic integrity, and just really trying to understand students' motivations, right? And also, invite student feedback. Again, how often am I providing opportunities to listen to my students so that they can feel emotionally safe in their learning environment and ask questions without judgment? And, maybe really understand when it's not appropriate to use AI and feel like they can come to us and that there is an ease in interacting with the instructor. And those are just a few of the options that we'll share with you of how we might integrate some student responsive practices into our classrooms.
Lovely, Aleta. And as Aleta tells you, as we both share these implications for practice, I always tell any audience that I'm speaking to, just choose one. It doesn't all have to go in at this very moment. You can choose one. So this semester for me, I really chose to focus on rethinking my instructional design, specifically with working on my syllabus and including a clear AI policy. Like, this is exactly what I want to use my students to use AI for. This is what we're not going to use AI for. And on a couple of the assignments that I have, I say, okay, if you're going to use AI for this assignment, just a little blurb at the end of the assignment instructions, this is what you should be focused on in terms of prompt generation. This is not what you should be focused on. And not every assignment has that. Some assignments are, I don't want any AI. Well, I hope that there's no AI use as they push through. But if there is opportunities for them to get feedback or for them to, express, like, what else am I missing as I analyze this particular thing? That's the one thing that I wanted to focus on. So this one aspect is good enough to start the ball rolling. And so as we start to think about AI, it's not going anywhere, but I want to shift the mindset from just focusing solely on the fact that everybody's cheating. Cheating has continued. Cheating has been a source of discomfort in education. It has been, and it will continue to be, and even has been heightened with AI. What we can do now for our classrooms is move beyond that binary and focus more on navigating what those gray areas actually look like. So it's not use, don't use, is if you're going to use, here's how to use it with integrity. If you're going to use it, be confident to express that you are using it. If you are not going to use it, look at the pros and cons. If you decide to come back to the floor and use it, be critically aware of the impact that it could have on your writing, on your work, on your critical thinking process. And this is kind of what we want to leave you with as you think about that one thing you can use to implement in your courses. Aleta and I are really grateful that you took the time out to listen. We're going to pause talking now because we want to turn the floor to the Q&A portion of things. We try to keep it right at, we're at 37 minutes. So we have time to open up the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was fantastic and a great way to start off our fall semester. So if anyone wants to unmute or you can put a question in the chat, we would love to hear from you.
And I'll stop sharing so that we can see everybody lovely in a gallery. Okay. Yeah. I think we had one question in the chat that I saw earlier.
Yes.
And a couple hands.
I can ask a question. This was a fantastic presentation. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
I have so many questions,
Okay,
but I'll ask maybe just one. It seems like the students who have like qualms about using AI, it's not because it's because they're worried about being going against policy in their classroom or expectations in their classroom, and that I guess I'm trying to grapple with how are they thinking about AI in terms of their own learning? When you described the assignments, that if they felt like the assignments were busy assignments, they were more likely to use AI, whereas if they determined or evaluated the assignments to be more meaty and more meaningful, maybe they would follow any guidance a little more closely on AI use or not AI use. So how are the students thinking about that in their learning experience?
I think in many contexts, students want to learn. For example, Jimmy Johnson that we saw in the study a while ago, like he said specifically, and this goes to Amy's question in the chat, if I had time to read all the articles and papers and readings that my professors assigned to me, I would. I just don't have as much time to get through every single thing. And so it's not that they don't want to learn and be a part of all the things that you assign, is that they're weighing it against the time factor that they have and their academic goals. So for the students who talked about, especially Mr. A, who talked about, busy work or boring assignments, I think it's also important for us as professors to also explain the why and show the connection, because in our mind, this particular activity is going to connect to something larger. I think students need to hear that understanding. We as instructors put it in our, lesson plan or our teaching plan, and we have connected the dots already. But for students, the dots aren't connecting until somewhere way down in the semester, or if they have struggles, you'll say to them, remember when we did activity X? Do you see how that applies? And so if we could get that verbiage out a little bit earlier, I like to tell students, this is the method to the madness, because right now it just seems like an assignment, right? And I give them a little bit of background as to, okay, this assignment is going to connect to these two concepts, and this is how it's going to help. And I think that may have an impact on how they categorize and weigh what to do first, second, or what to use AI on. And so that could be a little bit of a collaboration between instructor and student in the classroom context. Great question, Heather.
Insightful answer. So thank you so much.
Anybody else? I want to answer a question in the chat from Zagros. She says he's teaching an AI business and ethics class. Would that be helpful for students? I think so. I think it's important for students to understand the wider, I think when AI dropped in our laps, and I feel like that's how it happened, we just were tasked with use. It's quick, it's easy, punch it in and see this. It was kind of a novelty tool. But now it's become part of the fabric of both our personal and our academic environment. I think teaching AI and business ethics is an important aspect for both students and professors. And you're going to continue to hear me say students and professors, because those are the two stakeholders that have to work together consistently within an environment in which AI is trying at times to tear apart. And so just to understand that we as professors have an ethical, duty and a love of learning. Like, we want you to know everything we know. And we're passionate about the subjects that we teach. And for some students, they really just want to get really quickly through it and get this grade so they can move on to what they have to do. So bridging that gap between, I think AI and business ethics will be important as a nice little bridge for students to understand the why that's happening. I hope that was helpful, Saras.
It looks
Okay,
like there are
moving
two
question.
more questions in the chat.
Okay.
One from Amy Cooley. Were there any particularly surprising responses that stood out?
Yes. So Aleta, you want to take one? You want to take this one? You remember any right off the top?
Yeah, I think some of the things that were surprising were kind of the way that students use it in their personal lives, using it as a therapist, using it kind of as like a friend to talk to, using it to help craft text messages to partners who they were fighting with, right? So I just feel as though it's really important for us as teachers and professors to understand that the relational dynamic that students have with AI might be very different than the one that we do. And understanding that might help us understand how to broach some conversations with students about AI. It's kind of like, I mean, look, I'm no pop culture like expert or anything, but it's like when social media started coming out, not everybody was aware of how to integrate that into the classroom. But after a while, I figured out that like, oh, having an assignment that maybe used TikTok as a way when I was teaching high school to help students explain parts of the cell could be useful. So trying to understand students' relationship to a technology might help us have better conversations with them and better classes that integrate and incorporate that technology.
I think for me, one of the areas that stood out was, I think it was Maggie with the study abroad experience that we mentioned, having to purge herself from the AI. And even when we are looking in the literature, how much of the AI content was being published overseas. Rather than what's being published within the US, we can see that there is actually a different cultural dynamic as we see AI use in non-Western environments versus AI use in the West, and what that proliferation looks like. And so that was really surprising, and her approach to having to face that difference, coming from an environment where it was so fluid to coming from an environment that was so unsure. And I think that's the recurring theme, right? And we are getting a little bit better at creating some sense of stability, right? Within the context of the usage of AI and the terms that we're using, but it's not universal. And so if we could get, if students to kind of go into each class with a frame or a basis, because at one point it was just different instructors making their own AI policy, right? There wasn't any one thing. So you could use it in one class, but you couldn't in another, or you would totally ban from another class. And so there needs to be some kind of consistency for students, and I think for faculty as well. And this is kind of where the institution comes in. We're not going to leave them out as we focus on professors and students, but the institution also needed to play a role in creating that shared language that we could help both of our stakeholders to work really nicely. Yeah. Oh, Ben had a really great question. What does the demographics of students look like? And I can pull that up for you so I can talk through who we interviewed. So let me get to my interviewee notes here. Okay, so we had all of the students that we interviewed were undergraduate students. We had a mix in terms of racial demographic between white, and these are demographics that were students wrote themselves, white, Latino, Black, mixed race, Indian, Hispanic. And so we saw a different variation there. We also, in terms of status in school, we saw most of our participants were juniors and seniors. We had no freshmen. We had one freshman and one sophomore of the 15. Most of the students that were in were all business students, and they were focused on a variety of different majors. So we had business and computer science, we had real estate, we had some in marketing, political science, economics. We had one student in exercise science, data science minor. Trying to pick up some other words. Yeah, and so all of these students were really driven to succeed. We had no first generation students in the class. Oh wait, I'm sorry, in the group, and most students were had used AI in one or more courses. Does that help, Ben? I'm sorry.
I can also answer the follow-up that is connected from Joy.
Yeah.
We didn't ask specific socioeconomic demographic questions, but students did offer that we had at least 3 different students mention that they were worried about losing scholarships if they were caught using AI, which indicates that they were reliant on the scholarships, perhaps in order to remain enrolled in school. So although we didn't ask the demographic information about socioeconomic class, that was something that students raised themselves.
All right, thanks, Joy. Thanks, Ben. Okay, Amy came back and said, exactly. And so, and Amy mentioned just sharing examples of what inferior results look like. So in my, I teach a core course on business and corporate communication, and I ask students to punch in a prompt to generate a analogy to explain the different kinds of audiences that they might have to write to, so primary, secondary, so forth. And I had them share the prompts that they put in and the responses. And at least 3 or 4 tables, I have about 25 students in my class, at least 3 or 4 tables, which I grouped at 4 students per table, put in the same prompt and got the same response. And so I said to them, are you listening to the responses that you all are sharing? It's the same thing. So when all of you punch in the assignment and get the same thing out of it, this is where we get concerned, right? And so I offered a suggestion. So it's not just to point out the error and say, okay, that's why AI is bad. I offered a suggestion. Let's regenerate the prompt with a little bit more specificity. Talk about who you are going to be, who is the audience within the class. So generate a AI analogy for business students and, give the quick demographics within the class, ask AI to be a little bit more critical in its response, show them pros and cons, ask follow-up questions to the AI. What is this that am I missing? Can I be more creative in my response, right? So they understand how to prompt the AI so that it works well for them, right? And so I think that was a really good assignment based on the feedback and the smiles I got from my students that they could use it. And at first, when I said, okay, we're going to do an AI assignment, I saw some hesitation, and I saw some students like quickly pop up their chat or their Claude, or in Kenan-Flagler, we're moving towards blue chip now. And I also expressed to students as well, if you don't feel that you want to engage in using AI for this particular activity, you don't have to. So just creating that safety space, because a lot of students have very, moral reasons as to why they don't want to contribute any of the environmental impacts that might happen with the usage of AI. They just don't want to be a part of it. So just to respect everybody's landscape, as much as I'm excited about utilizing the AI and teaching them how to use it ethically, I want to balance that relationship within the class. So we create the classroom comfort where there is no emotional, shame, guilt, or fear in use, in asking questions, or in not using in and of itself. And so I think that's a pattern that us as instructors can create as well.
I saw that Kara Anderson asked a question in the chat. If it's okay, I'd love to respond to that. First of all, I want to say I am not here advocating for ubiquitous use of AI in every single context, in every single setting. I don't think that is appropriate, and I don't think that students are prepared for that, and I don't think that we should be doing that even if they were. I think that and Kimberly and I are definitely on the same page about this. I think right now I'm thinking about AI as a tool, and every tool has different applications. So as I'm working on my dissertation, I don't feel as though I should be using AI to be generating my ideas and writing for me. I don't think that would be the appropriate application of the tool. And so I think about, when we have discussions with students, how are we helping them create their own ethics around this in a way that aligns with academic integrity policies at our universities and institutions? And then also, how are we helping them use it not just as a, I want to get this over with, but as a, I'm using this to maybe cut down on the busy work so I can have more time for the critical thinking. Because AI is not good at critical thinking. I agree with your AI generated writing generally is not good, right? It's getting better. I will say that, but it's not at the level of what our minds can do. And I do think that having students understand those guardrails is sort of our responsibility as instructors, because we know that they are using it. Whether or not we are incorporating it into our classroom, students are using it. And we had a student say, yeah, even if my professor says no, I'm still using it. So I'm really thinking about it as like okay, understanding the reality of the moment. How will I choose to meet the moment? Whether or not it's appropriate for every assignment, that is an instructor's prerogative, right? That is up to you in your course. And it's also, I think, something that is worth having a conversation with students around. But I do think that it's something that is being used. And so it's kind of like, okay, how am I going to incorporate this or shift this assignment, or try to figure out how I can help move past the stuff that isn't the critical thinking, but can help me get to those moments more quickly and make more space and time in my syllabus for that.
Lovely said. Thank you. Anybody else?
I want to say thank you so much to both of you for giving us your time, sharing your research, your insights, your experiences. I love these questions. This session is being recorded, and I'm putting the link into our FLC meeting minutes. And so once the Zoom processes it, I will put that out there. It will also be included in our FLC YouTube playlist, which is just new for this year. There will be much more coming for everyone about the FLC third year and what that's going to entail. But on behalf of myself, Jules, who is here or was here earlier, Heather and Siobhan, who was not able to be here, your FLC leadership team, we are thrilled that you are back again for another year. And thank you so much to Kimberly and Aleta. And I am excited to be bringing in this part of the student experience to really shape what we're going to focus on this year. So thank you, thank you, thank you. This was a fantastic way to spend our lunchtime.
Thank you. We appreciate you coming in. Thank you for spending your lunchtime with us. We love all the reactions. It makes us feel good and keep going. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Heather. And thank you, everybody, for being a part of this.
Wonderful. Have a great day, everyone. Happy fall semester.
Thanks
Thank
so much.
you. Happy
Bye.
fall.
Happy fall.